And we're live. Hello, everyone. My name is Rira, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual event with Stephanie Scott and Lisa C. Before we begin, I do have some short announcements. If you would like to submit a question for the Q&A, just click on the Ask a Question button at the very bottom of the screen. If you see a question you'd like for our speakers to answer, you can vote for it, and the question will make its way to the very top of the list. And if you're considering supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of What's Left of Me Is Yours tonight, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. You'll be directed to our website where you can complete your purchase. And our next virtual event is scheduled for tomorrow, and we'll be doing a graphic novelist panel. And you can learn more about our upcoming virtual events on our website and by following us on social media. And with that said, let me introduce our speakers, and then I'll pass the screen over to them. Right, so Stephanie Scott is a Singaporean and British writer who was born and raised in Southeast Asia. She was awarded a British Association of Japanese Studies Toshiba studentship for her anthropological work on What's Left of Me Is Yours, and has been made a member of the British Japanese Law Association as a result of her research. And What's Left of Me Is Yours is her first novel. Joining her today is our moderator, Lisa C. Lisa C. is the New York Times bestselling author of several novels, including The Island of Sea Women, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, Snowflower and the Secret Fan, and Dreams of Joy, which debuted at #1. C. was also the recipient of the Golden Spike Award from the Chinese Historical Association of Southern California and the History Makers Award from the Chinese American Museum. And with that said, I'm going to pass the screen over to our guests. Enjoy the talk, everyone.
Well, welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here. I'm very excited to be introducing Stephanie Scott to all of you tonight. It's really wonderful to be able to introduce a debut author. If you haven't seen, I guess it's going to be backwards, but this is the beautiful jacket. And again, you can order it. I see that little sign right on my computer screen. So I actually, before we start, I just thought I should tell you where I am, and maybe Stephanie can tell you where she is. So I am a lifelong Angelino, actually a fifth generation Angelino, but I'm actually in Colorado as we speak. And where are you, Stephanie?
I'm in London.
And I see you have a few books behind you. Are those your to be read piles?
It is my to be read pile. I'm in my study where I wrote What's Left of Me Is Yours, and I've been trying to organize it. And so I think the crucial books have been piled in front of the fireplace, which is what you see.
Well, it makes me want to come over and sort of see what you're reading. So I'm guessing that a lot of people who are watching tonight have yet to read the book. And so I thought it'd be good just to start by telling us what it's about. And yeah, just what it's about and maybe how you first came to write it.
Sure. Well, the novel is inspired by a true crime murder that occurred within the Japanese marriage breakup industry. And for those of you who don't know, the Japanese have an at-fault divorce system. And so if you wish to divorce your partner, you can hire someone to seduce them and provide you with grounds for divorce or an upper hand in the divorce proceedings. And these agents in Japan are called wakare sasea. And so in the real case, a wakare sasea agent fell in love with his target. And when she found out the role he played in the breakdown of her marriage, she tried to leave him and he strangled her. And he was swiftly arrested and he confessed to the police. And as he was doing so, he said, "But I love her. I couldn't live without her, and I love her still." And I wondered if that could possibly be true, if you could love someone and kill them, because love in its ideal form is selfless. And so I started to think about all the different kinds of love that exist, and also Tolstoy's idea that there are perhaps as many different kinds of love as there are people. And I was newly married, so I was thinking about enduring relationships. And that was really my way into the novel. And so it's very much about what we do, how we love, and how our existence can hinge on another person and what we do to each other for love, and what is love effectively. And so it's both a whodunit and a whydunit.
So I am curious, how I know that your story is really fictionalized, but I am curious about the real story and what did happen in the end. Was the breaker-upper sent to prison? I'm just, idle curiosity.
Of course, sure. No, he confessed and was convicted, and he's still in prison today. So, but that case occurred in 2010. And what I've done in my novel is I've changed all of the characters, their backgrounds, their names, their personal histories, their jobs. And I've moved the love story back in time to Tokyo in the 1980s and 90s. And then there is a modern day thread which follows Sumiko, a young woman who's grown up never really knowing how her mother died. She thinks it's a car accident, but then one day that changes. And so the modern story thread is her investigating her mother's life and her death and uncovering this love story. And the past narrative is the love story itself. And I guess I wanted to go back in time partially for selfish reasons. I loved Tokyo at that period. It also reminds me very much of Singapore at that time, which is where I was growing up. And I must confess, I did want to avoid social media and mobile phones and all of that. I really wanted to just get back to relationships without devices, and so that was why I chose to do that. But in the real case, the Wakaresase agent was, in fact, I believe he was married, and there were children on both sides. It was extremely complicated, and so what I also wanted to do to create some distance from that case was simplify it. So we have one child who's entirely fictional, and a single marriage breakup agent and his target and her husband, and then there is a grandfather who raises Miko. Yeah.
So you've already touched on this theme of love, and and you also write about it quite a bit in your acknowledgments. I did send you an email asking if you would just read that one paragraph that's on 179. I just think that it says so much about love, and maybe you can just, after you read it, just expand on it a little bit for everyone.
Sure. Our judicial process revolves around the issue of motive. Who, how, where, when are not as important as why. The desires that dwell in the deepest parts of the mind must be examined and proven before a sentence can be determined. Even in the most brutal of murders, the emotional state of the suspect comes to the fore. The notion of love is considered. Hatsukoi, first love. Miren, lingering attachment. Katamoi, one-sided longing. Asheo, mutual love. Fukai ajo, deep love. The court will evaluate the depth of love and proffer leniency accordingly. And so it is on this intangible value that a person's fate can rest. Love, which for so many is a matter of life and death.
So beautiful. So one thing that really struck me, I am part Chinese, and I write about China and Chinese American stories. And, in Chinese, similar to Japanese, that there are these very different words that convey very different aspects of love, written characters. So you would have mother love, gratitude love, pity love, respectful love. And I'm sure all of those that you just, first love and all of those kinds of things. And we don't, in English, you basically have love, right? I can say I love hamburgers and I love ice cream, and I used to love to travel back in the day. Maybe one day again. I love my husband, I love my kids, but we're really stuck with that one word. And do you have a sort of a theory about why China and Japan and maybe other countries in Asia have sort of nuanced words and phrases to describe different aspects of love.
I think it's really interesting that they have such compact phrases, because I suppose we have distinguishers like filial love, or various descriptors that distinguish the different kinds of love. But you're quite right. It's very interesting that there are these very compact and nuanced specific terms. And as to why, goodness, linguistic sophistication.
Well, I mean, one thing is often, Asian countries, I mean, this is just one of those vast stereotypes, is that, no romantic love, and and traditions of arranged marriages and things like that, I mean, I don't know that that has anything to do with this, but I just sort of think it's sort of interesting to think about. And certainly when I was reading this, I was thinking about the different aspects of love, the love that the little girl, the narrator really, for part of the story, has for her grandfather, and this very long ago love for her mother, and certainly Rena. I mean, everybody has sort of a different approach and a different connection to love.
And I think it's maybe has something to do with love's social role, in that it's interrelated to many things that are very, very important to Japanese society. So duty, reverence of your elders. I think Sumiko, who's raised by her grandfather, reveres him so much and loves him so much. And it was, and he loves her. And I think exploring that relationship was one of the favorite aspects of writing the novel for me, actually, because I wanted to look at it, and there are so many tensions and complexity within it, and he makes all sorts of choices in the name of love, which she then has to live with. So I find that very interesting, and maybe it is that it's such a pervasive concept that it really infiltrates every aspect of society and every aspect of human relationships. And so it's actually very necessary to have all of these different terms. Love in Japanese law is fascinating, actually. That paragraph arose out of my research because there's several books actually by Mark D. West, who studies law and the role of love within the law in Japan. And so he goes into tremendous detail, but the type of love that is deemed to have occurred really does affect sentencing within crimes. And so these distinctions become ever more important. And that's where the paragraph I read out arose from.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for certainly an American audience to think about the judges in this case, really looking at these different aspects of love as they sentence someone and as they look at a crime. Do you know, is that unique to Japan, or do you happen to know if that's something that occurs elsewhere?
I think I worked quite extensively with lawyers in Japan and also prosecutors, and I think the difference between the Japanese system and, say, the more Western legal systems is that instead of there being an adversarial setup where you charge someone and then their defense attorney defends them, and you have a kind of battle really where the person's freedom is at stake. The emphasis in Japan is on finding out the truth of what really, really happened, of getting as close to the truth as they possibly can, even whilst accepting that whatever truth they uncover is going to be by necessity imperfect. So many defense attorneys, 99% of people charged with a crime in Japan are convicted. And this is because they only charge people who they are absolutely certain they can convict. So in many cases, the defense attorney, will just admit my client is guilty. And then they investigate the nature of the crime and find out, what sentence is most apt. And I think that is quite different. I mean, I'm not an expert on global law, although my family are lawyers, but I did find that quite distinctive.
Yeah. So I'm a huge Law and Order television show fan, and but certainly, you know, in kind of popular culture, whether it's television or movies or even books, that often there's a crime, you know, and it just gets solved at the end of the hour, right? But you never really see the ripple effect. And in real life, you know, for any kind of crime, there is such a ripple effect that can last decades, you know, within a family. And well, could you talk about that a little bit? Because that, you know, that seems to me very much at the heart of this, with Sumiko, of course, trying to look at what happened, but it has an effect on her grandfather. I mean, it does have this something that permeates and changes each character. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that idea, but also a bit about each of the main characters. I would say Sumiko, Rina, Kaitaro, and certainly the grandfather, and even Rina's husband, maybe a little bit.
Certainly.
I know that was a lot to throw at you all at once.
It's all right. Well, it relates very much to your last question, actually, in what we were discussing about how the justice system, in these adversarial programs or Law and Order, it very much focuses on what's going to happen to the perpetrator, or will there be justice for the victim, but not necessarily on the complexity of what happened or how that will affect everyone around the victim and the perpetrator. And what I wanted to do actually was create a crime in which everyone is implicated and everyone is involved, and to an extent guilty in their own way. You know, even
that was such a powerful sentence in the book. It's pretty late in the novel where even Sumiko says we were all guilty, including myself.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. The whole novel revolves around that sentence. I'm so glad you mentioned it. And, you know, we're so used to polarization and binaries and extremes, and, you know, this person is innocent and this person is guilty. And I wanted to really dig deep into that and explore the ways in which people can all be involved in a crime, or how people are always involved in all relationships, in their evolution, their breakdown, and I'm very fascinated as well by family history, and particularly the connection between mothers and daughters. That was very, very important to me. I'm an only child, and my mother is the most important person in the world to me. And my father and my husband would object to that, but it's true. And so, you know, my mum was actually very ill when I was writing the book, and I was forced to truly confront life without her. And I was thinking of all of the things that can be passed down from mothers to daughters, and all of the wonderful things that history can impart, and also the experiences that your mother has that she won't necessarily be able to hand on to you, or that she will only hand on to you later in life when you can understand those same experiences. And it occurred to me the enormous loss that Sumiko, the protagonist in What's Left of Me Is Yours, would have experienced, you know, having grown up without her mother. And so I very much wanted to look at that, and also I think in so many criminal cases, the victim is dismissed or reduced to just that, her status as a victim. And I really wanted to recover Rina's life, and the person she was, and all the things that were important to her as well.
Yeah, which leads me right into my next question about photography. And she is a photographer. This is part of how the Kaitaro, the marriage breaker-upper, really approaches her, what they have in common. And certainly, you know, we've all heard that phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but you describe so many images that you're actually doing the opposite. You know, you're trying to take an image that's worth 1,000 words, I suppose, and kind of reduce it, but at the same time really illuminating her character. And you're in a sense using words to create photos. Anyway, I thought, could you just read that one short section? This is the one on 225, well, at least in my American version.
Yes. Rena rested her cheek in her palm. She treasured these moments in the quiet of the night, a recent gift for them, the chance of an evening together. In the past months, whenever they had been apart, Rena had imagined herself in this apartment, imagined that the small studio was her home, and that her photographs clipped to the walls belonged there, and that the world contained only this man, and this desk, and this bed. Now the fantasy had spread into reality, and it would include her whole life, her daughter. Once they found a bigger place, and soon they would, they could be a family. Then Sumi would be with her always, and none of them need ever be apart. She looked again at the photograph in front of her. It was an experiment, part of a new sequence she was planning on intimacy, the layers between public and private life. The shot had been taken in this apartment, the camera propped on the very desk she sat at now. She had pointed the lens towards the bed and set the timer to take the shot in 10 minutes. Then she'd sat down next to Kaitaro, who was facing away from her, wrapped in a cocoon of sheets. She was still watching him when he turned towards her, and his arm curled around her waist as he rolled over in the bed. Rena looked up then, just as the shutter clicked, freezing them. She, looking straight at the camera, her eyes large and dark, the freckles on her nose standing out in stark relief, flickering over her cheeks. Kaitaro, blurred, relaxed in sleep, his arm curving around her waist.
And one more paragraph, because I think I had it. My pages were a little different than yours.
Rena loved what she had captured in this picture, the unguardedness of it. There was something predatory about it too, which thrilled her. Her gaze staring at the lens, capturing him unknowing in sleep. She also loved that even in this state, he was possessive, his hand grasping hers, his other arm curled around her waist. For they were both of the same mind, intertwined, each of them wearing the hint of a smile.
I just love that passage because, of course, it really captures how she feels about him, but the photo itself captures so much about how he feels about her. Anyway, what drew you to the idea of having her be a photographer, and what did you think you could, you know, what did you think you could illuminate by using photography as a motif or theme?
I'm very interested in photography, and my father is quite a gifted photographer, and so it was something actually that I had always wanted to explore in more detail, and I actually became a photographer for a time in the writing of this novel, but I really loved it as a medium, particularly in print form. And actually, the more I spoke to photographers, the more I discovered extraordinary aspects of how personal it is, and how people can make pictures, can say so much about themselves through their pictures intentionally. How every decision you make in the development of a photograph has an impact, all of the different skills and styles you can use. It's really an art form, and so beautiful and so expressive. And I wanted something, I wanted an art form that they could bond over, actually, and also something that isn't necessarily that wouldn't necessarily be acceptable as a career in contemporary life. You know, particularly for Rina, she's the daughter of a lawyer, she's trained in law, she's expected to follow a certain path. Kaitaro has a lot of constraints around what he's able to do, and certainly what he can do financially. You know, neither of them is really allowed to, you know, fully explore their love of photography, and so they do it together. And I really wanted that that bonding to occur. Yes, that's what led me down that path, and it just grew more and more fascinating. And it's so tactile and sensual and atmospheric. And you know, I've worked with photographers, and you know, they rhapsodize about the darkroom and the scents and the silence, and it's, you know, it's so intimate, and yeah. It's passionate, exciting.
So I love how you just keep leading me to my next question, which actually has to do with research. And I think I read somewhere that you spent 10 years doing research. I don't know if that's, you know, you must have started when you were 5. And so everybody's watching, we can all be very impressed, but 10 years is a long time. And so I guess my first question would be, why so long? I mean, what were you doing during all of that? But also the research, and I write historical novels, so I really appreciate research when I can see it. I mean, and it doesn't, the one thing I will say about novels, that whether they're historical or like yours, more of a sort of literary whodunit, kind of, sort of, that I really always hate it when you're reading and then you just stop, and now you have to have the history for a paragraph or 5 pages, and you've woven that in so beautifully, just seamlessly, it seems to me. So anyway, could you talk about some of the different aspects of the research? And I know you have, you know, the Japanese bar has sort of included, you know, given you an honorary membership or whatever, but they certainly have acknowledged the work that you have done. So anyway, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure, thank you. Well, I greatly admire your historical research, and I have for many years. So I'm so glad that that it did come across seamlessly to you. That's a real honor. And why did it take so long? Goodness. Well, I actually started writing this novel at the beginning of my writing career, and I hadn't, you know, I'd studied literature. My degrees are in literature, but I hadn't written anything creatively when I started to work on this book. And I was actually, you know, like a good Singaporean daughter, I was working in finance, and I hadn't, you know, hadn't run off to write novels at that point. And so in that time, I was also switching career. I turned down a vice president role to write full time. My poor father went berserk, as you can imagine. So I have much in common with Rina and Kaitaro in this sense. But also, I think, you know, the immersion required a lot of time. I had to, you know, I'm half Singaporean, I'm racially half Indian, and I grew up in Singapore. My family is still there. My grandparents were in Singapore and Malaysia during the Japanese occupation, so they were both fluent in Japanese. And my grandmother actually befriended a Japanese soldier and taught him English, and her experience of the Japanese was quite different actually from my British family's experience. They also fought the Japanese in Burma and Thailand and Singapore. And, you know, my grandmother developed a love for Japan actually, and she worked with Japanese clients. She was a lawyer. She worked with Japanese clients till the end of her life. And so I grew up very much aware of that. My grandmother is sadly deceased now, but she left many Japanese things to me. And so, you know, whilst I had grown up with these affiliations, you know, and I have cousins with homes in Japan, my father has worked there, I still, you know, all of that is all very well, but as you very well know, it's not enough to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to spend a great deal of time there, and I had to work. Well, I got to work. It was a real privilege. I got to work extensively with lawyers in Tokyo and in London, and the prosecutors at the Japanese embassy in London. They're the secretaries for legal affairs. They worked very closely with me for several years. And so it was really just a deep dive, into the culture, into the law. I traveled around Japan. I visited the locations. And of course, once you've done all that research, you then have to put it to one side and write a story and feather in the details as delicately as you possibly can. And that takes time too. I think my husband thought I'd lost my mind. I spent about 5 hours on one sentence one afternoon, and he was like, oh my God. But I think
well, people don't understand the process, but it's delicate. It's very delicate work. I sometimes think of it, that game Jenga that's all, and then you pull the pieces out, that when I first write the first draft, it's really I have to use everything.
Yes.
And then it's all about pulling it out, taking it out, and just having enough that the structure can still stand, but that it still has that seamless quality. So I actually would just sort of like to shift a little bit to just talk about a couple things about the Japanese system. One, legal system and divorce in particular, but one, and you touched on it at the very beginning, but I'd like to circle back just in case people weren't paying enough attention in the moment, that Japan doesn't have like no fault divorce. Somebody is to blame, and then one of the two sides gets complete custody with no visitation rights. Can you talk? I mean, I don't even know what the question is, but can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe how it developed. Has it changed at all? Did you see possible changes for it? I mean, I'm throwing a bunch of questions at you, but also, is there any sense, I mean, I assume this has been going on for a long time, of, again, what that ripple effect has been on the kids who one day never again see their mother or their father, one or the other?
Sure. Well, the at-fault divorce system, initially, it fascinated me because, of course, this exists in, all over the world, and particularly in England and I believe America. And I was very much reminded of Evelyn Waugh and the hotel divorces that occurred in the 30s in England, where, one of the parties would have to assume fault for the divorce, and in order to provide evidence, you could be photographed entering a hotel with a racy young actress or a model, and they would be a breakup agent effectively. And so that's what started with that. And I mean, there's a lot of, I think, controversy about fault divorce systems and how they can make the process of divorce really unbearable. There's actually, I think there are changes moving through Parliament right now in England, where they want to remove the fault aspect from divorce here. And in Japan, it is particularly complicated because joint custody is illegal, and they only have sole
And
custody.
why is that? Why is joint custody illegal? It's just how it developed. I mean, is there, what's the reasoning behind it? Do you know?
I think it has to do with the traditional family setup, the family registers, and children can only belong to one family. So if if one of the parties is going to move on and take the children with them, they only get registered to one family. They can only belong to one family. And I think it's just part of the traditional family setup that has evolved in Japan. And also there is the belief really that parents, once divorced, will not be able to act together in the best interests of the child. So there is a reasoning that it's actually better for the child there as well. But of course, this is it's a very topical issue at the moment. there's actually, I think the Ministry of Justice is actually looking into the possibility of joint custody right now. There's an investigation that they're undertaking, and it should take about a year. There have been several protests by people who are campaigning for joint custody. And it's really interesting because there is a whole range of experience there. There are documentaries that chart parents separated from their children, and these are brutal, horrifying documentaries, and the experiences are extremely painful. But they affected me deeply, and they affected some of the scenes in the book very much.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also have, family friends who've divorced their partners, and the husband has made a new life somewhere else. And in one of the cases, the husband tried to get back together with the wife, but the family intervened because she'd been through too much, and they didn't want her to go through it again. And they didn't tell her that they'd intervened at the time. They told her later, but she was very happy with that decision on their part.
Mm-hmm.
And her children, when they grow up, will reconnect with him if they wish to. But this is very normal and accepted, which can be quite strange to us when you think about a child needing both parents in their life.
Very, very powerful. So I just want to say to everybody watching that we're going to open it up for questions in a few minutes. I had 20. We're only on number 9. So if you guys don't have questions, don't worry. I'm ready. But before we go to the questions, I do want to talk about just sort of generally about Japan's criminal justice system. Here, you must know that here in the United States, this is a big issue that we're looking at right now. And I just actually have to read what I wrote here. I was really shocked. I mean, I was really just shocked by what happens in a Japanese courtroom, but also what Japanese jails are like. And so, in Japan, just as here, people work in like the prison factory, obviously, but in the Japanese jails, not allowed to look at another prisoner or a guard, not allowed to check the time, not allowed to look out the window. You have to get permission to wipe your face or blow your nose. I mean, this is it seemed to me very harsh in the prisons, and even the justice system and the courtrooms. You've already talked about that a bit, but could you talk about the prison system there? And again, I would ask, is that changing? Is it evolving? What are the consequences for sort of society at large, but also for people if you've served, let's say, 20 years for a crime and you haven't been allowed to talk to anyone for most of that time, it's going to be pretty hard to integrate back into society, it seems to me.
Yes, I'm glad you asked. I would give you one caveat, which is that the prison system described in the novel is very much in the 1990s when Kai would have been in prison, and it's actually based on a Human Rights Watch report. Their findings from that time that was contemporaneous with Kai's imprisonment. So I was very happy to find that. I think it has changed. I cannot comment too much on how the prison system is now. It was impossible for me to visit a prison. They won't let you in for any, certainly not as a novelist. So I wasn't able to visit a prison in modern day. But I think there are different levels of prisoners and different rules that apply to each. There's only a certain number who are in solitary, effectively. And even though there are very strict rules during work times, I think there are also break times and meal times where they are allowed to speak and people can share cells, and so there are various levels, as I think we have in most justice systems.
Okay. All right, well, I know it's time to open up for questions. I just want to say a couple things before we open it up. And again, type your question at the bottom. If we run out of your questions, I have plenty more. There's also that button at the bottom of the screen to order the book. What's Left of Me is yours. It's just a beautiful book. I really just love it. I'm so happy that I'm getting to talk to you tonight. And I also just want to give a huge shout out to Vroman's. I think everyone in the world knows it is my favorite bookstore on the planet. I love Vroman's. I feel like it's my family bookstore. It's where I've had all the debut book parties for every single one of my books, going all the way back to the first one. So I love the store. I'm so glad that Vroman's invited us to be here tonight, and that all of you have joined. So let's see some questions, or hear some.
Right.
How it works.
Yeah, I can read out some questions right here. It seems like you guys did a wonderful job answering a lot of the questions that the audience submitted. So let me see if I can pick some that you guys haven't touched on. This is a short question. What are your thoughts on the UK and American covers of your book, Stephanie?
So you can hold them up.
Because they're so different. I do have them both here. If I may, just hold them up.
Beautiful. Very different.
Extremely different. And I was so surprised by that. And people are really divided about which they love. But I have a lot to say. So I love the American cover. The American cover means a great deal to me, and this is actually, so there's a Japanese photographer who I really admire called Miki Takahashi, and this is a self-portrait of Miki. And I was so delighted when she allowed us to use it for the book, and she's simply outstanding. And what's extraordinary about this picture is that when I saw it, not only did I love the double exposure that Miki has used, but also she looks very much like Rena. They have the same haircut, they have the dyed ends of the hair. There were such extraordinary similarities that it felt almost fated. So I was so excited, and it was actually Doubleday who first found that particular photograph, and then Miki and I were talking on Instagram, and she allowed us to have it, and I'm so grateful that she did. And the English cover, this is actually, I don't know if you can see, this is actually meant to be a woman's face as a map, but also a woman's face coming out of the page, and her chin is meant to be the Izu Peninsula, where a lot of the novel is set, and it's a location that's very important to Rena and Sumiko. Their family home is in Shimoda on the Izu Peninsula, and so you can see the rivers and the mountains, and there are even, I don't know if you can see, but in gold foil there are golden hydrangeas, which are very famous in Shimoda. So they're both really symbolic covers, and they both mean a great deal to me. I worked really closely with both my publishers on them, but they are extraordinarily different.
Yeah, they're both very beautiful. How lucky that you got such beautiful covers for your debut novel.
I am really fortunate.
So both of you write stories that require extensive research. How do you know when to set aside the research and start venturing into fiction?
Well, I'll answer first and just say that I research all the way to the end. I mean, all the way to the end of writing. And even in copy editing, sometimes a question will come up and I have to go and look more stuff up. So I am a research fanatic. It's actually my favorite part of the whole process. So to me, it's like a treasure hunt, and I know I over research, but I love it. So yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to start the writing. I mean, I will start but then I'm still researching all the way to the end. How about you, Stephanie?
I would say the same. I absolutely was researching all the way to the end, and I started writing early on in the research too, but then, there were things I uncovered about the legal system that changed the plot, that changed the discovery method, the way in which Sumiko gets hold of the case files. But that was quite wonderful because there were surprises, and I think they added to the sort of spontaneity of the novel. And I suppose, since they were shocks to me, I hope they're shocks to the reader. But I was definitely researching all the way until the end. There was a shot of a prison, and I couldn't find a photograph of it anywhere. I could find photographs of other prisons that were built at the same time and were in the same mode, but I had one shot of an angle of the prison, and I just, in copy edits, you go a bit crazy, and you try and get everything right desperately. And so in the end, I found a painting of that angle of the prison, and at that point, my editor took the book away from me.
Yes, well, that happens.
So yeah, all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of the questions that we have left were already answered throughout your conversation. A lot of them have to do with your research into the legal system and also like what inspired you to write the story. But I'm going to throw in a question of mine. This is your debut novel, and I'm guessing that this is not the type of year that you expected it to be. How has it been releasing your book into the world during a global pandemic?
Goodness, it's been really unexpected and traumatic, but there have been really lovely upsides too. One of which are these online events. When my book came out in the UK in April, all the bookstores were shut, and I actually had COVID at that time. So I spent most of my publication day lying on the floor of my study, holding my phone, and yes, it was very difficult. But and I suppose one of the hard things is not being able to see your book in any bookstores. I think that's a real shame, because obviously it's all in my head, and I wrote it in this room at this desk, and when you expect that the publicity and the publication will involve the extroverted side of writing, where you go out and meet people and you do events, and it's very external, but that hasn't happened here. I'm still at my desk, I'm still in this room, and so you begin to wonder if you've just made everything up, but obviously that's not the case, and I'm very glad to have a physical copy of the book. So that has been really, really wonderful, and I've been really loving the reception that the novel has received. That has meant the world to me, and is really marvelous, and I'm so grateful.
We just got a new question in here, and I guess this is a question that both of you can answer. How does writing stories with Asian representation help you connect with your roots?
You go first.
I think as I said, my grandparents had a very close relationship to Japan, the Japanese, and also the Japanese language. And so I think it was a wonderful bonding point for me and my grandmother when she was still alive. We would talk about Japan a great deal, and also the law, because she was a lawyer. And so it just provides a wonderful insight and you get to really spend time thinking about your family and thinking about these different regions in the world, and everything that they've experienced, and wars and political events and economic crashes that most people aren't aware of. And you really get to dissect that and look back into history, which is extremely rewarding. And I mean, for me personally, I have cousins with homes in Japan, but also my godchildren are Japanese, and it's just been, they are 4 and 7, and it's just been wonderful to grow up with them. And so many of the childhood rituals in the novel started with them, because these are things that we do together as a family. We're extremely close, so it was really wonderful. It helps me sort of understand, how their mother, my good friend Sumiko, for whom the narrator in this novel is named, grew up. But it's wonderful to watch her shaping them and their cultural heritage, and seeing how they're going to carry that forward and assimilate it. They're Japanese, but they live in London, and so it's very interesting to see culture evolving and and being passed on. So it's really, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I would sort of echo almost everything that you said. I think for me, some of it has to do with history, just as with your grandparents and what the people who came before me, what they went through. I'm only here because I stand on their shoulders. And I think that there are other aspects of history that are really important to know about what our families went through. And, I think in my family of just the hardships of immigration, the hardships of racism, the Chinese Exclusion Act, that we can see today sort of variations of that, of what my grandparents and great grandparents went through. And I think to be able to have a historical perspective, but also one that's really tied to you, to your own family, it makes you look at the news on television very differently, because you're interpreting it differently. But I would also say just this very emotional connection that I have to my family. You were talking about your grandmother. My grandmother appears in every single book that I've written. It's not her, may not look like her, maybe a different century, but there's an aspect of her personality that is in a character in every single novel. And that has been a way for me to be with her, even though she's now been gone for 20 years. But that when I write a character that has part of her in it, it allows me to be with her and to visit with her and to even sort of talk to her, right? Because if you have a fictional character, you're thinking about how would they respond? What's that part in them that makes them look at the world in the way that they do?
Yeah. I think that's very interesting. I'm actually wondering if my grandmother will stay with me. This second novel that I'm researching now is inspired by my Asian family's experiences of the Second World War in Malaysia and Singapore, and very much my grandmother's experiences when the Japanese invaded. She had to flee her home and hide in the jungles for a time. So I wonder if mine will follow me. I hope so. I hope I'm able to write more novels.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you will write more novels. So we have time for one last question, and this is from Marion Evan. Who in Stephanie's life had a precision with words? Because Stephanie certainly does.
That's very kind. Thank you.
I noticed they didn't say that about me.
Of course it applies to you. But thank you so much for saying that, particularly because it is 3 a.m. here in London. So you've made my morning. Who has a precision with words? My mother. My mother has a precision with words, and my mother is responsible for my love of literature and all of my early reading. And I'm actually obsessed with the English language. I think of all of the languages that I've been fortunate enough to be involved with. English is my favorite, ultimately. So thank you. It's my mom.
All right, and I think that is a great place to end things. Thank you so much, Lisa and Stephanie, for taking the time to speak with us and for that wonderful conversation. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and had wonderful questions as well as like wonderful conversations in the chat. Again, if you're considering supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of What's Left of Me Is Yours, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. It will take you to our website where you can complete your purchase. And the replay of this conversation should be available within an hour using the same stream link. So if you have friends who missed the event, you can send them the link and they'll be able to watch the conversation. And if you would like regular updates on our upcoming virtual events, just check our website and follow us on social media because we have a lot coming at you. And with that said, have a good evening, everyone. Get some sleep, Stephanie. It's 3 in the morning over there. So stay safe and have a wonderful week, everyone. Right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.